You say, well, we talk a lot about participation, but one of the things is why participation? So there's some research in the field that it's called tax morale, which is growing. There's growing evidence that actually when people participate more, they even pay more taxes. So even when you control for all the other factors where you have more participation, more people are paying more taxes. So there are other effects, like even effects on health and so on. There's growing research when we look. It's not in the field of participation, but if you look, for instance, in the field of health, there's going to be research indicating that it's even good for your health. So if participation is so good, how do you increase it, or how can technology help it? No? So start with a very simple case. Here's the city of Ipatinga in Brazil. That was in 2004. They had a participatory budgeting process. Does everybody know what it is, more or less? Have an idea? So, okay, so there. We wanted to see how phones could work. So there was a participatory budgeting process. We have a treatment group and control group. And what we did basically is that we sent like 34,000 geo-targeted calls and SMS inviting people to attend these face-to-face meetings. So a very simple solution here. So if you lived in an area, you get a call with the voice of the mayor. Hi, it's Mayor John, blah, blah. Come to School St. Peter's today to decide where your budget should go. So here we had 30 more participation in treatment groups. And when you ask people, because the city administration spent lots of money on newspapers and TV ads and radio, and the phone calls and SMS were by far the cheapest ones. But when you asked which means of communication motivated you the most to come to attend the meetings, we found these results. We did similar experiments in different environments, such as the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Dominican Republic, and we found absolutely the same results when comparing the effectiveness of other media as compared to phone. Now, so another thing that technology can do that is pretty obvious is reducing participation costs. No? So I like to think participation of these happy people, almost like in the way that Tocqueville described participation when he arrived in America. No? But actually participation, let's tell the truth, is a pain in the ass. You know, you end your day of work, you have to take like this bus, and then you go to a meeting, and it's just full of people. You have to take care of babies, and it takes costs and so on. So in the end of the day, participation is extremely difficult. So technology just do to address this problem. Where we have high participation costs, we have low participation. So we try to reduce the participation costs. So a few cases here. I'm going to be very fast because it's long. So Belo Horizonte city in Brazil, they had a traditional participatory budgeting. You see, it's not a small city, 2.4 million inhabitants. They had a participatory budgeting of $43 million. So people decided where $43 million were going. So I'm not talking about budget consultation. They would say that would be done and that would happen. Still, participation extremely low, 1.5%. And that's pretty much the pattern when you go to large cities in participation. So they decided to do the digital participatory budgeting where people could participate online. No? So it was $11 million, so you see the budget was much smaller. No? It was through e-voting and 1.2 million per public work. So I could choose, for instance, to reform a hospital, reform a school, and so on. No? To alleviate the digital divide, you have the access provided by supporters. So for instance, churches would put computers on the way out, and the priest would say, vote for that thing in our area. You had 178 internet points with trained personnel for assistance, and you still had a bus that would go in the areas of highest digital divide to enable people to vote. So voting period of 42 days, people could vote, so you had it was quite convenient. Total participation, 173,000 people, 10% of citizens participated. And what was interesting is that even though it was just through the internet, the highest turnout was still in the poorest areas of the city. Just to kind of a bit demystify that thing, oh, if people don't have internet access, just the rich will participate. That's not the case, at least in Brazil. It's interesting when you compare the resources. So it's not just money, it's about ease of participation, because here you had $43 million and only 1.5% of people participated. And in the other one, with a budget nearly 4 times smaller, you had over 6 times participation. Remote voting to reduce participation costs also in Rio Grande do Sul state, where we work with. They have 11 million inhabitants. People decide on nearly $100 million on a year basis online voting. Here's the website. We help them a bit with that. And here's the results. That was only in 24 hours, 1,200,000 people voted. 18.2% rate of participation. In ancient Athens, rate of participation at its best was 25%. And remember, we're only men who had slaves, and one of their biggest duties was just to participate. Still, here we have almost like the same amount of participation as Athens. No? So I don't want to brag about it, but when you talk about the participation, I'm going to say this is one of the highest, the best cases you'll ever hear in your lives. What is interesting as well, Brazil, that is the second country with the number of Twitter users. During the consultation, this public consultation made the Twitter trending topics. So there are some governments trying to engage with people on Twitter. This one engaged through making a meaningful process. Now, another thing that I want to say, we talk about social media. Let's go where people go. No? But I want to talk about cross-selling citizen participation through Open 311 services. Jeremy mentioned a bit earlier Open 311 in San Francisco. So when you go to McDonald's, you ask for a Big Mac, what do they tell you? Would you like fries with that? No, and normally that's what you get in the end of the day. So when you call a call center, a governmental call center sometimes, and people ask for a service or they ask for an information, what do governments normally do? They hang up on citizens. No, so I mean, if you call your bank nowadays, they might eventually give the service you want, but most of all, they will try to sell you another service. That's something that governments fail extremely to do. So here's what we're doing in the Dominican Republic. They have a kind of like 311 service that they get 5 million calls a year. So what we do is that now when people call that number for whatever reason, sometimes it's to get access to cash transfer or whatever, we do the same idea of cross-selling. At the end of the call, we say, is there something in your neighborhood that you'd like to improve? Or how are health services in your area? How many power shortages did you have last year? And then we can georeference. So this government can go to Facebook. They'll probably get 100,000 likes, but he's getting 5 million calls a year. So he can just use this access. If the thing is to go where people go where people are calling already. It's insane. You talk to governments and they say, can you make me a crowdsourcing website? Nobody goes, and they're getting 100,000 calls a day. So why don't use these channels to engage with the citizens? So also what we do is that we capture their phone numbers, and we can also send to them calls later on, saying, for instance, there's a meeting in your neighborhood and so on, I don't attend and so on. For those who are thinking of designing participation online, I just want to say that design matters, or in the way of, or like some behavior economists would say, choice architecture. So here, changing a bit. Here's, for instance, an example of what I would say of what not to do. You see, is when you put ideas and you show right away to people what are the most popular ideas. What happens if I go there? I'm just going to look at the most popular ideas, you see? So what you have is like the early winner bias effect, in which you just generate effects that are totally random. And there's enough research showing that. So when you're thinking of e-participation, believe the quality of your results might depend a lot on the technological choice that you make. So here's an example of something that I want to show. It's kitten wars. So basically, apparently some people, they take part of their time to put their pictures on the web, and people can vote to see if their cats are better looking than others. What is interesting in their fact is that they use a pairwise system. And there's growing evidence that pairwise voting, for instance, produces better results in terms of sorting what is the best idea and so on. For a number of reasons. First of all of ideas have an equal amount of consideration. And second of all, I am not biased by how others have voted. As you can see here, I cannot see the scores of how others are doing. Now, so they go voting, and actually they get pretty good results on that. So for instance, here's the ugliest cat, you see, and here's the cute cat. You know, that's not what normally happens with government consultations. Because of the design, we normally end sometimes with the ugly cat going to the top. So this is so much true that, for instance, when you look, a researcher in Princeton who is doing this on preference aggregation, he, inspired from that, he decided a system which is called All Our Ideas, in which you can embed pairwise ideas at any point. So just one quick thing to say that design matters. No? So just some of the thoughts that we're having at the bank, particularly as we think in terms of design for online, for budgeting and so on, how to make people consider ideas that maybe they would not consider. So we all know the tag clouds, no? So tag clouds is another thing that creates this kind of let's say, snowball effect, because people tend to see what is more tagged and so on. No? So imagine if you created a tag cloud that was not based in terms of views, you see? So it would be based in terms of views. So projects that people see more, they become bigger. You know? So like things that I'm looking on the internet, they become bigger. But then you do and you invert it. You invert the rationale. So things that become most viewed, they become smaller. And things that become least viewed, they become bigger. And as you go clicking, then again, in the least view, they start to become smaller. So what you generate is a redistributive effect in terms of attention, making that everything is taken into account. So if it's in the case of a participatory budgeting, so maybe can have even something with images. So maybe even if the most affluent areas which have more access to the internet, they're all the time looking at the swimming pool in their neighborhood, at some point it will become difficult to ignore these kids who have no access to water and sewage systems. So these are some of the things to happen. And of course, when you're thinking about online design, we also should think about offline design. So here's a city in Brazil participatory budget in which they put their budget information, they just paint on the walls. So it's what I like to say, it's like a budget data in citizen readable format. So also what they can do is doing budget visualizations that normally we do online, we could paint in offline. So we should also start to thinking, what can we transport from the online environments to offline environments to generate better policies. So just final considerations. No? If you want to do e-participation, try to think of building upon existing infrastructure. If you're getting 2,000 calls a day as a city administration, you might put lots of resources, but you're most likely not to get that neither on Facebook or through just a website where people will come. Start to use that channel of interaction that is already happening as a means to use information. Use existing institutions. All that I'm saying is, let's not start to create participation from nowhere. If there's something on the legislative process in which has like citizens hearings or so on, take profit of existing institutions. Most e-participation initiatives fail because they occur in the absence of institutions and organizations. Also, you should think of different methods of citizen selection. What I'm saying is that every time we talk about e-participation, we normally think of a website in which is volunteer participation with open. There are other methods of citizen selection. We can do mini publics, we can do randomly selected, or we can work with specific constituencies. E-participation is not just whoever wants to participate. There are different methods of citizen selection. No? Another thing, enable self-organization. I don't know how it's the case here in Sweden, but most e-petition websites, they let people talk to government, but they don't let people talk amongst themselves. So if you have 100,000 people who are coming to an e-petition website, there should be a way for these people also to organize among themselves and maybe solve their problems even without the government. Second, design matters. And finally, I just want to say that some of the things that I'm talking here, they are beyond push-button democracy before anybody says that. So what I want to mean is that we can think that, oh, but the citizen is just clicking there and voting and he's not really making a considerate voting. So first, there's a matter of design here. All of these options, for instance, in participatory budgeting in which people can vote, they were previously made by a small group of citizens who deliberated, which was representative. So when people are voting, they're not just voting on any silly thing. That was previously, so there was kind of like already a previous process of deliberation and selection and considered judgment that was embedded in that. Finally, another thing is that we might see remote participation as a cheap form of participation, but what is important about it is that maybe participating remotely is not the end of the engagement process, but it's the beginning of the engagement process. So it might be just an entry point so that later people can, for instance, come and attend a face-to-face building and deliberate. You know? I remember just a comment of that. There was a time that when they were doing postal voting in Switzerland, people say, oh, but voting is so serious. People should at least walk there and vote themselves personally so that they will be more reflex. So there was a guy who said, so we should even put barbed wires in front of the ballots because then the really motivated ones will come. So it's not up to us or governments to tell how much effort people should be putting when they want to participate. If we're working with governments, governments should be creating the conditions for people to participate, and people want to participate in different manners. That's all of that. Thank you.